In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense. In 2015, it still is Common Sense.
I'm Elizabeth Smith.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. This week, our regular interviewer, Representative Patricia Morgan, is traveling. So a little later, I'll take her normal seat to conduct an in-depth interview with Carolyn Medeiros, Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities. She founded the Alliance with the purpose of assisting neighborhoods with their representation in government, media, and the public eye. Together, we'll detail some of the successes her organization has had by being a loud voice for residents so they're not overlooked. Our roving reporter, Roland Lavalley, will bring us a report from the State House. Our show will conclude with lighthearted remarks on a heavy topic of happiness by commentator Jeff Richard. And throughout the broadcast, Elizabeth and I will reappear from time to time to pose the satiric question, "Are you kidding me?" But we begin, as always, with analysis of some of the top news stories affecting Rhode Islanders today. Liz.
Thanks, Mark. Many in this state think the current racial divide is something that affects someone else. A Black Lives Matter walk and rally took place last Sunday, this in response to a flyer produced back in June. Its delivery caught residents by surprise. The flyer's message was in counter to the Black Lives Matter movement messaging and was left out overnight as a way to cover its publisher and distributor. The flyer stated a few census comments and then says, quote, "What does our future look like? One only needs to walk through any inner city and you will see a microcosm of what is to come," unquote. The hashtag White Lives Matter was present and aligned with the Voice of the Renaissance, a shadowy white supremacist group. A newly formed community organization group on social media called White Noise Coalition Rhode Island coordinated the walk and rally. The group is an extension of the progressive New York City group that got its start in 2010. The head of the East Greenwich School Committee, Carolyn Mark, also a progressive, was at the forefront of the event. So here's where the train goes off the rails. First, it seems plausible that the white noise crowd produced the flyers themselves to start the controversy and covered up the distribution in the dark of night. While no one discourages a peaceful march, one must question the motives of a group that exports participants and looks to threaten law enforcement with words like "pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon." And if Black Lives Matter, why are millions of innocent children being slaughtered by Planned Parenthood during late-term abortions for fetal tissue sales? The most disturbing part of all of this is how all white people are being lumped and labeled racist. No White Noise Coalition, I am not a racist, and you're hypocrites. The progressives never want a crisis to go to waste. Hypocrisy is admired and promoted inside the psyche of these delusional few. Mark?
Thanks, Elizabeth. This week, in the Providence Journal, political reporter Kathy Gregg took note of an unsurprising, though probably unhealthy, alliance within the Department of Transportation. She reported that newly appointed Director of DOT, Peter Alviti, had received public congratulations on his new job from Armand Sabatoni, the General Secretary-Treasurer and New England Regional Manager of the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA. In New England Laborers Update magazine, the union boss said, quote, "All of LIUNA is proud to have one of our own chosen for such a position," unquote. The headline of Sabatoni's piece read, "Laborer named to top position." That's a reference to Alviti's 16 years as Director of Programs for the New England Laborers Health and Safety Fund. It's not uncommon in the Ocean State to have the executive of a public operating unit be the only non-union member of that team. In most of those cases, the one non-union member is someone who came up in the union ranks but had to disaffiliate to qualify for the top management position. Virtually all of our municipal fire departments are examples of this process. But does simply being common practice make it a good idea? There can be no dynamic tension during contract negotiations if everyone is on the same side. Just last week, we saw a statistical analysis which showed an ever-increasing number of firefighters in Rhode Island despite an ever-decreasing number of structure fires. That's not productivity, folks. In the Department of Transportation, we are faced with crumbling infrastructure which must be repaired and maintained with ever more scarce budget resources. How's that going to work when the guy in the corner office has a well-known bias towards agreeing with every union demand, no matter the impact on overhead costs? No doubt, Governor Raimondo has made an astute political call in appointing Peter Elvedi as DOT director, at least from the standpoint of her fundraising and get-out-the-vote power base. What it means for our chances of getting needed upgrades to roads and bridges, given the realistic forecast of department funding, is another matter, and it's one which should be of concern to all taxpayers. Liz?
Is it jail time for Christians? There was an opinion piece that was released to several online blogs this week that really gets to the heart of the attack on religion by our government. Here's an excerpt of the op-ed piece, Jail Time for Christians by Lloyd Marcus. So this is how the game is played? Leftist operatives in the courts, supreme and state, create unconstitutional laws to further their anti-God agenda. Then leftists say those who disobey their lawless laws are not behaving like Christians and good Americans. The Supreme Court's ruling on Obamacare and homosexual marriage mean the Constitution will now say whatever leftists want it to say. Folks, do you realize that based on this new precedent, the left can make anything it wants a law? Incest, pedophilia, bestiality, and so on. Meanwhile, it goes without saying that President Obama is the most lawless president in U.S. history, refusing to obey laws he dislikes. Sanctuary cities run by Democrats defiantly disobey federal immigration law at the cost of endangering and even leading to the killing of American citizens. It's insane to allow these conniving vipers to claim the moral high ground, lecturing us about obeying the law. Christians, with their heads not buried in the sand, knew that jail time was coming for Christians who refused to bow down and worship a false god. Kim Davis realizes that the Creator's law trumps the creation's law. This is why she has the strength in essence to say, y'all can have a fit and even throw me in jail. I will not bow down and worship your God. Trust me, the forces of evil are outraged. This is why I get upset with Christians who still do not get it, labeling any pushback as intolerant and unchristian, lecturing fellow Christians about showing these passive, humble homosexuals more love. I want to scream. This ain't about that. This is about saying no to being bullied into embracing anti-biblical behavior, unquote. When the government decides to jail someone for demonstrating their faith, we have to remember this is what we fought a revolution over roughly 87,320 days ago. You know, the one started on July 4th, 1776. You can read the rest of this great opinion piece by Lloyd Marcus at AmericanThinker.com. Mark?
Liz, before we begin my Q&A with Carolyn Medeiros, let's take a break for a satiric look at our state government in action, shall we? It's bound to make you join us when we ask,
Are you kidding me? The Park Street Bridge in Cranston, Episode 2. Are you kidding me? We can all rest easy now. The governor has announced the accelerated inspection program was completed. And here's how they did it without leaving their desk. Whee! Measure, 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 measure. Really? A few weeks back, Lieutenant Colonel John Laughlin had this to say. Now we know the bridge was closed most recently because it was found to be structurally deficient. Note that no work, zero, zip, none of work has been done on the metal superstructure that supports the decking. Just the decking was replaced. And this is what bothers me. How is it that the bridge was structurally deficient, yet no work was done on the structural supports? I just can't figure that out. Again, and I'm having a hard time with this too. The decking they took out looks just fine to me, except in places where it was damaged to remove it. I just can't get my head around that either. Laughlin added, is it possible we threw roughly $500,000 at a bridge to replace decking that didn't need to be replaced and did nothing to fix the underlying structure, just to be done and out quickly for political reasons? Is it possible that under the Raimondo administration, DOT has become a political showmanship machine? See, I just can't figure this out. And lastly, where did you get those little soaps in the DOT bathroom? My wife loves little soaps like that you put out. You know, when company's coming over, unquote. You know, I remember seeing wood coasters at the State House gift shop. Proceeds to benefit Rhode Islands. Are you kidding me?
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, the show where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life. We're joined this week by Carolyn Medeiros, Executive Director of Rhode Island's Alliance for Safe Communities. Her advocacy for victims in Rhode Island has singled her out as one of the main forces in that regard. And Carolyn, thank you very much for coming down and telling us about it in detail.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Let's start by just defining the Alliance for Safe Communities. Tell our audience what it is.
The Alliance for Safe Communities is a 5031c nonprofit dedicated to assisting Rhode Islanders in achieving their goal of living in safer communities, something that's been promised to them by government but not necessarily afforded.
That's excellent. So you pursue advocacy for these populations, not only through lobbying the legislature, lobbying individual departments within the state government, the local government if necessary, but also through direct victim support. Do you know that?
Absolutely. We work with families through every stage that they're going to need to go through, from the crime to the court system, working with the media networks, right to closure, whether it's parole hearings, parole denials that we've rallied and challenged and winned at.
That's excellent. Talk to me a little bit about some of the direct support, the hands-on contact that you've had with victims. I know you've rallied in support of victims. You've been there for victims during their moments of grief.
Yes, we for a variety of issues, murders, pedophile issues, the neglect and abuse of elderly. We've rallied to have parole denied for a murderer in a domestic violence situation. When you take a victim and you highlight it and bring it on to the news and for the Rhode Islanders to see, you're actually giving attention to an entire issue now. And people start to feel like something should be done. We got good news coverage, they're being proactive, they're rallying, they're doing this or that, and it leads us towards legislation, bills and laws passed into law.
So you are a public service organization that has to be in the public eye to get that kind of attention and bring it to the victims you advocate for.
Yes, often the system itself fails victims. They feel, and rightly so, that they're being further victimized because their needs are not being met. Often victims feel that the rights of the criminal supersedes the rights of the victims. And I would have to agree with them.
Well, I would have to say that your organization does things that no governmental organization or any other charitable organization that I know of actually does. So you provide a great service for the community, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk a little bit about why the Alliance for Safe Communities was created and when.
I was a victim advocate in 2008, and I covered the pub crawl issues, which was a binge drinking event with youths involved for profit of bars where the kids would go bar hopping. It was disastrous. I worked with a victim who was killed, who wasn't even a participant of a pub crawl in the city of Newport, and we began a trend to look at drinking and youth differently and how we'd handle it. The social host laws came into effect, tagging party houses, accountability. Pub crawls were banned, and I received Victim Advocate of the Year from the state of Rhode Island in 2010. The Alliance's inception came with the introduction to Open Doors, a nonprofit who built their headquarters, a $4.5 million building in an impoverished neighborhood, yards from a daycare, blocks from an elementary ed school, and directly across a liquor store, for formerly incarcerated, every garden variety from petty theft, drug dealing, murderer, and pedophile, with 19 apartments and their main headquarters for offices, $1.5 million secured in federal stimulus funds by Congressman Langevin. It was put in a very bad location for pedophiles. There was triggers everywhere. You can't walk 5 feet without stepping on a child. You had a giant liquor store across from it. We addressed our concerns. It was put there, the director said, primarily because the bus lines. Well, those bus lines, it was actually a tale of 3 cities because the bus lines went into Johnston and Cranston as well. So now, these 2 cities were being impacted by a bulk of formerly incarcerated who Sol Rodriguez, the director of Open Doors, said herself, most of her clients primarily were commuting on those bus lines.
Now, you've evolved somewhat into a focus on domestic violence and the domestic violence that is essentially victimization of your clients by in many cases, these people who are now re-entering at a higher rate than they had been in the past.
When we address an issue like domestic violence, we address murderers and pedophiles. When we address an issue like domestic violence, you know, I always say that a restraining order is a piece of paper. I've never seen it block a knife or a gun. Usually a knife or bare hands. It's a very personal crime, by the way. So when I hear taking guns from anyone with a restraining order, I don't agree with that, because I've seen more cases of it being very personal and up close where knives are used in an individual's bare hands. But the domestic violence cases we handle, and we get a lot of attention and education to the community as to what's happening and what can be done. We unfortunately we've dealt with murder victims as the end result of the domestic violence, which helped us with our murder sentencing bill this year.
Yeah, it essentially gave a legacy, even though
it added to the numbers.
Lost.
When we had a homicide rate to look at that stayed steady since the good times credits were even awarded, that homicide rate has pretty much stayed steady. They were inclusive in those statistics.
Well, that's good news. Let's now describe for the folks how the Alliance for Safe Communities operates as an organization today. What, for instance, is your mission statement?
Dedicating ourselves to what we are most passionate about will allow us to be the best at what we do and translate into the fulfillment of our responsibility to achieve for others. Do not be passive, but be extraordinary and make a difference. And that comes from a quote of the victim of the pub crawl incident, where it should have been involuntary manslaughter resulting in his death, and it only played out in civil court. But I hold our members to that degree of performance, that we are there to be dedicated to our clients and advocate for our victims who don't have a voice, and to vindicate them.
So what you've done is you've created an organization over these years that essentially has some gravitational influence in the public perception and in the public debate. And you use that organization selectively to find those instances where your mission statement is most well served to go out and essentially take direct action, either legislatively or hands-on to victims.
Yes, and every socioeconomic background, every race, creed, we're not, whatever victim comes to us, we try to help.
Well, what that's done, Carolyn, as I know very well because we've worked together on a number of projects, is that you have created the Alliance for Safe Communities and made it into a public force to bring attention to victims' rights. And that is something that I think wasn't there, certainly not to the degree which you offer it, before the Alliance was formed. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree. I just attended the working group, the criminal justice working group that our governor has assembled, that will have meetings again in October and December. If people are interested, it's open to the public. And I sat there, and there were supposed to be victim advocates in there, but I didn't see any victim advocates, and the dialogue was portraying the criminal as the victim, and what can we do for the criminal? And for some reason, Mark, you and I have created victims in these criminals. I don't know where we failed them, but we did. And that's where our tax dollars are being spent now, to support them as victims. So
I take it from that you were an observer at this meeting rather than a member of the commission. That sounds like an oversight of the part of the government on the part of the governor. Right now, we're going to take a break and take a look at some of the other offerings from Common Sense, and we'll be right back. Every August, the Gallup organization conducts a poll of both public sector and private sector workers. Its object is to ascertain and track the levels of relative comfort of each group has with their jobs. What do you think the results show? Are you kidding me? Of course, the public sector workers are happier with their positions on 9 of the 13 criteria Gallup uses to draw its conclusions. Who wouldn't be? Public sector workers report greater satisfaction with their retirement plan, their health insurance, their amount of vacation time, their job security, their chances of promotion, and the amount of money they earn, just to name a few. Government workers have a lock on all the things that keep those of us in the private sector looking over our shoulders. Short of committing some insane act in the workplace, they cannot be fired. Since seniority rules in the civil service, their upward career path is pretty much guaranteed. Everyone knows they have far better retirement plans, at least on paper, than we do. Who wouldn't want all that? Those of us who don't have those guarantees, of course, are aware that at all times we are working without a net. I'd argue that keeps us focused on the task at hand, and that makes for constant improvements in productivity in the private workplace. And, by the way, that constant upward trajectory of private sector productivity is something for which our brothers and sisters in the public sector ought to be thankful. Without it, there would be no way for the dwindling number of taxpayers to be providing all that actual and psychological comfort to the burgeoning number of those who administer the public infrastructure. Oh, and the private sector ought to keep one other thing in mind. We let it happen. I am not kidding you.
Hi, my name is Brandon Bell, Chairman of the Rhode Island Republican Party. For me, the recent very close special election made me energized, inspired, and optimistic about our future. The Rhode Island Republican Party is united. We teamed up from across the state with a message that we are no longer fragmented. We stood together in an unprecedented effort to get a quality Republican elected to the General Assembly. We engaged in an organized get-out-the-vote effort. We organized a ground game like I've never seen that had us working to get our voters out until the minutes the polls closed. Now that we are together, first, people will understand us better and join us if they fully understand why we believe what we do. Second, people will vote for us if we can define why we do what we do. And lastly, people will respond and want to be a part of what we believe if we define ourselves and not let others define us. What we do simply serves as the proof of what we believe. Spread the message that there is only one option for those who seek balance, responsibility, honesty, and civility in the state of Rhode Island. Step up and join the fight. You can find us on Facebook at Rhode Island Republican Party or email me directly at bbell@rigop.org. Thank you, and God bless.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, the show where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life. We're back now with Carolyn Medeiros of the Alliance for Safe Communities, and thank you again for coming in for an in-depth interview.
Thank you, Mark, very much.
We want to talk a little bit now about how the Alliance for Safe Communities goes about addressing its target issues in our state. What do you actually do?
Well, like I stated, we work with media sources, we work with other nonprofits nationally and local, and we target departments within the government that we also work with. We work very closely with the Board of the Brotherhood of Corrections. They believe in having safe communities. Not only are they correctional officers, so they know their clientele better than anyone, but they have families and friends that live in the communities that, just like you and I, are impacted by, say, a reentry agenda of criminals who commit crimes against innocent people.
So I take it that when you walk into the Brotherhood to lobby with them, it's friendly ground. Is it the same way when you walk into the Department of Corrections in A.T. Wall?
In a very superficial way, I'm greeted. But I don't think that I'm totally appreciated. I don't feel like I'm totally appreciated. And you question, as far as me being on the Criminal Justice Working Group that our governor just established, I wouldn't expect that she would include me. However, I would expect that she should have included the Brotherhood of Corrections. And the fact that they were excluded, and they know their population better than anyone, and they're honest with their statistics and data, is an injustice to Rhode Islanders.
Well, you are an advocate for the victims, and there is no victim advocate on a board that's supposed to include one. So
the only victim I'm hearing them talk about are the criminals.
Amazing. When it comes to lobbying, the Alliance also does a great deal of lobbying with the legislature itself.
We try. We work bipartisanly. That's tough to do on Smith Hill. But I believe the Republican base is strong, and they understand the meaning of being tough on crimes, and especially certain crimes. The Democratic side, it gets tougher every year. I sit in front of a Senate Judiciary of 10 defense attorneys, 12 members total. I think that it's in their best interest, from what I've seen with the level of animosity, especially this year when I passed the murder sentencing bill, that they want what's in their best interest, being defense attorneys.
Well, stands to reason, but it's good that there's someone like you to take the other position. The last thing that I would argue you probably do quite well is public relations. I mean, here you are on this broadcast outlet. You've done many other shows of this type. Would you care to name a couple?
Done the Anthony Walsh Show. I'm on talk radio, and I work with all 3 news media networks. The reporters all know me. They all have my home phone to call me regarding any situation that they think they want a comment from me or action taken. When we did the Child Safe Zone bill, I was actually contacted by Tim White regarding, this is the problem, what do you think, Carolyn?
So you've become a recognized advocate to the point where they use that home phone number when they have a situation where they want to get some kind of counterbalance so that they can see what's really happening. That's great.
And I'm very grateful.
How does the Alliance for Safe Communities lobby effectively across such a kind of a broad band of resources? You not only have legislative lobbying, but also directly in executive offices and also in some of the departments. What do you actually do? What does it entail?
Well, you know, we communicate well. Dialogue. We dialogue well. We communicate well. We do letters, we pound on doors, we engage in rallies, we put pressure at the powers that be to look closely and maybe give it a second thought as to what they're doing by rallying and working with news media.
I, for one, have seen you at your most effective when you're eyeball to eyeball with somebody, convincing them, because there are plenty of people that are doing things, as you know, for political purposes, but they suddenly think about the human cost.
Yes.
You're the one that tells them that.
We have no agenda. We run on private donations. I'm not getting paid, and we don't charge our victims who come to us for help. You know, like I said, every socioeconomic race background is irrelevant. So, you know, we're there for the fidelity to our cause.
And finally, to go back, you also bring some of these issues to the attention of the public media so that they can get on the air in the first place.
When you bring a victim forward, they're a victim of a crime, the crime is an issue, you're able to highlight that issue and how it's impacting all of Rhode Island.
Good job. What kind of legislation has the Alliance for Safe Communities supported since beginning its work in 2012?
We support a great deal of legislation, usually tougher on crime bills. And in the last 2 years, we've passed legislation. Last year, the Child Safe Zone bill, which was in regards to hiring pedophiles, registered sex offenders, to work in facilities that service children. Tim White had come to me with Channel 12 in a case at Hasbro Children's Hospital. He had a level 2 sex offender, access anytime, even when he wasn't working, with a swipe card, any floor in that children's hospital. He did the story, contacted me, asked me, what do you think? Can something be done? Can you look into it? And immediately I got back. Within a week, we sat down and I put out the research. 20 other states had some form of child safe zone laws in place. We're in the dinosaur age in Rhode Island. That's what I thought, that there was nothing on the books. In fact, they, you know, for many of the liberal progressives on Smith Hill, they were appalled at what I was suggesting in the ACLU. Well, I don't have to tell you what their reaction was, but we ended up with, you know, researching, working with Assistant AG Joey Lindbeck, and I did a great deal of the research in forming a law, the Child Safe Zone law, which frankly is one of the toughest in the country. You're going, you know, if you're a pedophile, you're looking at fines and imprisonment. If you're a business owner who wants to ignore registered sex offender registry that's given to you for free to do a background check, you're going to be fined and incarceration.
Amazing.
And second-party contractors we include in that bill. So if you have a janitorial service coming into the daycare, the school, or a facility that's servicing children, it would impact that person's bill. That was challenged by Senator Archambault from Smithfield. He actually tried to pull out the liability clause out of our bill. The last 3 days, because you know, Mark, everything happens in the last hours, burning the candle, tried to pull that out of the bill and wanted me to go along with it. And I said, absolutely not. You might as well kill the whole bill. That would mean Mark Zaccaria owns a daycare, I'm a pedophile, I want a job. You say, no, you're a registered sex offender. I'm going to sue you now.
Amazing.
No.
And you just finished up legislation that you've been working on for a couple of years, did you not?
Yes, thank you. It was the murder sentencing bill, and that took 3 years, but we got it through this year, and I was determined that this was the year it was going to happen. The Alliance engaged in research that no one else had done, and we submitted it to the media. Olivia Fecto loved it. Channel 6 took it and ran with it. And what we had put together a package in the 3 years that we were studying the murder sentencing bill, which, is tougher sentencing for murderers. We noticed a trend where murders weren't just happening now, but in 3 years, bodies were being murdered, people were being murdered, their bodies were being defiled and discarded like garbage. And we titled our packet, Rhode Island, a throwaway state, with a state in a garbage can. And then every case was revealed to them as to what murder was morphing into in this state. They found that very disturbing. The media really liked it a lot. It was the truth. It was factual. If you can't handle it, too bad. That was my attitude.
Sounds like it was also new news to some of our legislators who had to then vote on it.
Very disturbed. The Senate Judiciary is very disturbed with seeing that packet put together. But
and seeing it in public, perhaps.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But you know what? Again, we were the only ones who did that research and caught a trend that we saw in the 3 years that they were stalling on that bill.
Good for you. We're up against another break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take that break now, and we'll be back with more from Carolyn Medeiros and the Alliance for Safe Communities.
Okay, so which is it? A 38 Studios flip or flop? Are you kidding me? Only in Rhode Island would you have a judge running around inside the revolving door of judgment on whether or not to release documents pertaining to the 38 Studios investigation. Let's re-examine our timeline, shall we? On August 28th, we were all holding our breath when we learned of the release of 18,000 documents that were being unsealed. Wow! We're going to get to the bottom of this now. Wait! No! Wait! What? Nope. A mere 24 hours later, there was a request to redact 1,000 pages of documents. Curses! Just when you thought this was over. Wells Fargo, a defendant in the case, did not want certain documents revealed, according to Ted Nesi of PRI. Robert Duffy, a lawyer for Wells Fargo, says its request was to redact a total of 215 words, all of which were names, to protect the identity of the clients. What I wouldn't do to get my meat hooks on that list. But lawyers for the state argued the bank did not have the right to decide what information the public should be allowed to see. Okay, we're back on track now. Nope, again. Superior Court Judge Michael Silverstein sided with Wells Fargo, agreeing that sensitive information about the bank's clients should remain under wraps. So you see, the cycle continues. Will we ever get to the bottom of this? Are you kidding me?
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life. We're back now with Carolyn Medeiros, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities. Carolyn, we've been through quite a lot of material so far, but perhaps some of the most difficult things and the work that lies ahead for the Alliance is still ahead in this interview. Let's start by talking about the kinds of legislation that the Alliance has opposed over the last couple of years.
The kind of legislation that the Alliance has posed is what we're seeing, a trend towards Smith Hill being lenient on, say, more nonviolent offenses, but yet have a tremendous impact on our communities. So, say, the decriminalizing of shoplifting. It's not even a misdemeanor. It would be a penalty the first 2 times. The decriminalizing of driving with a suspended license or no license would not even be a misdemeanor. It would be a penalty with a slap on the hand. We're seeing a shift. We addressed the serious issues, pedophiles and murderers, and murder sentencing, and we accomplished that. Now I see it coming from the other end, from our politicians on Smith Hill, where they're trying to lessen these nonviolent crimes. But these nonviolent crimes cost communities a great deal of money. Over $1 billion was reported in retail loss in stores throughout the country by the National Organization for Shoplifting Prevention.
Sure,
in 2011.
The costs are well documented
Yes.
for just the small crimes, but would you also say that it creates sort of a culture of permissiveness
Absolutely.
that promotes the worst crimes that are going to happen and puts us on the wrong road?
Absolutely. I liken it to the way you would raise your child, stealing a gumball, stealing a couple candy bars, stealing a bag of candy, stealing a pair of Nikes. They're going to escalate. You're not doing anything. You're not directing. There's no accountability for one's actions. You're creating the monster, is what you're doing. So what are we all going to wait until they get up to the end that I finally got laws in for murder or pedophiles? Really.
Yeah, by that time, it's hard for them to see a correlation between their action and the punishment.
Yes.
I likened it before when we spoke about this to the early days of the Rudy Giuliani administration in New York City, where the city was awash in petty crime, and he evolved a strategy of law enforcement specifically aimed at that. I believe they call it the broken windows approach, where you take care of all the little things, and that creates a non-permissive environment where people then tend to act better, and the good actors have some sort of gravitational influence. What other sorts of things have you opposed recently?
We're sitting in the Criminal Justice Working Group, the second meeting, and we'll be attending the next two meetings, and we're concerned that we'll see a flow of money, federal funds possibly, going to nonprofits to do community policing, and they're calling it rehabilitation programs. And those programs will be placed, buildings, halfway houses, resource offices for services in our communities all over, residential areas, every part of the state.
I believe the term of art they're using is justice reinvestments.
Yes.
Where they're trying to shift priorities.
Yes.
It's a great homonym. I mean, it sounds super, but what it really means is taking money away from some of the proven approaches towards maintaining order and throwing it out there. And there could be accounting reasons for them to do that, but
I would argue that if they feel that they're saving money by taking resources and money from the Department of Corrections and the prisons and putting it into the nonprofit sector and letting these individuals live in our communities and continue to commit crimes under minimal supervision, we're not saving any money, because the taxpayers are paying for resources to deal with these individuals as they act out in our communities.
how about the current trend towards driver's licenses for anybody who asks? Is that playing into this as well?
Not in that criminal justice, they're just dealing with that subject. The executive order that our governor is referring to is a separate issue, and the Alliance does not support driver's licenses for illegals. We've testified alongside Ryle in opposition.
Yeah, so that's another sort of legislative avenue that you're opposing right now.
We have always worked closely with Ryle, and Terry Gorman is a colleague and a friend, and I have to admire his tenaciousness at what he does, because he is truly under fire on Smith Hill.
Well, as I've told you, I have used my Rhode Island driver's license to legally drive in more than 20 nations around the world in my corporate life, and so it's not about driving. They can use the driver's licenses they have to drive legally here in Rhode Island. It's about something else. Let's move on now to the top issue of concern for the Alliance of Safe Communities. We were talking off camera, and you said it is the placement of reentry facilities that you think is going to cause the greatest concern to the potential victims who you try to protect.
Absolutely. There was just recently, while I was in session, and it was brought to my attention, a facility put on Warwick Avenue and next to an elementary ed school and Pilgrim High School. And the residents were in an uproar. They actually, the school committee was never notified, and they actually requested and got the school bus stop that would have been in front of this, similar to Open Doors, servicing anything from petty thieves to murderers and pedophiles. They moved the school bus from 300 to 500 feet away from it. They're accommodating for the pedophiles and the murderers and the drug dealers that are going in and out of there. But these nonprofits don't have to accommodate for anybody. I warn everybody in their communities, when you see a vacant house on your street, you try to keep tabs what's going on your city council level with that property. And that goes for office space as well, because this was put in a plaza. I believe it's in between a liquor store and a gun shop and a hair salon. That must play out real well for domestic violence abusers who are coming out of treatment angry.
And what you're saying, though, is the school committee wasn't notified. Certainly the neighbors that live there weren't notified.
No.
So the first time anybody notices that one of these reentry housing units is being placed in their neighborhood is when they start bringing in clients.
Yes, absolutely. You know what, Mark? This happened in Connecticut, in Monville. And the city council tried to take it on with a lawsuit. It went to Superior Court, it got dismissed, and now it's on appeal. They are livid. That is a rural residential area. I'm watching that in comparison to what they're capable of doing in Rhode Island.
So they're not necessarily bound by any of the ordinances that might exist today about population density in a building, about building uses, any of that sort. They can just go in because they come from this other tract.
The building suits its purposes, and they get the zoning is approved.
Boy, that strikes me as somewhat unresponsive to the communities in which these places are placed.
Absolutely. I think, what we'll be looking at, I might be looking at legislation regarding just that.
Well, that may
it would have to be on a state level. It can't be done municipally. I've seen that.
Get ready for a hard fight, I would suggest, because I think this all goes hand in glove with Roadmap Rhode Island and Agenda 21.
Absolutely.
They're trying to socially engineer population centers.
Thank you for bringing that up. Well, it is intertwined. Agenda 21 and reentry is intertwined. You're going to put Section 8. The only two things that disqualify you from living in Section 8 when they put Section 8 next in your neighborhood is if you produced and sold methamphetamines and were prosecuted for that, or if you're a lifetime registered sex offender. You can be anything else. You can be Alfred Brissett the thrill killer and live next door to Mark Zaccaria.
Well, he's living next door to somebody right now.
Yes, he is.
Now, I guess that what you said before is important, because the interrelationship between some of these people who have been nonchalantly re-entered into society and the victims that are essentially defenseless that you try and help. That's difficult at best, and I hope our listeners have understood that. We are up against another break. We'll take a short break, and then we'll finish up with Carolyn Medeiros. The governor says, we need a Rhode Island Welcome Center at Exit 1 on I-95. But the ghost of Welcome Centers past quickly intones, what about the closed Welcome Center we already have at Exit 3? Governor, are you kidding me? Not afraid of ghosts, Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor jumps in to note that her new plan for Exit 1 includes restaurants and a filling station. The ghost gives Pryor a piercing glance at this and asks in a hollow voice, okay, so what about the closed Welcome Center we already have on I-295? It has all that stuff. At this, Team Gina stutters and hesitates before using the standard incantations of her high office: economic development, jobs, and supercharged statewide branding, as if that last one would banish any evil spirit. So, we have a number of failed examples of exactly what the governor proposes. Is she actually just trying to force another inside deal for one of her cronies? Is this really just about taking land from an existing industrial park in Hopkinton to move the space into big box retail use? If that's the case, this is the ghost of Roadmap Rhode Island trying to create a population center where the feared private enterprise now reigns. Well, at least have the decency to say so, ma'am. Or if you really were an asset manager in a past life, take the underperforming asset that's presently moldering at Exit 3 and get some money for it to soften this year's deficit. At least that way the free market has a better shot at picking a use for the parcel that passing motorists will actually use. And if the new private welcome center does fail, at least it won't be taxpayer dollars that are lost. Or does my magical incantation have no power over you at all? 38 Stadium. Are you kidding me?
What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I anymore.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. Common Sense is the broadcast where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life. And as you've been watching, we have been here today with Carolyn Medeiros, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities. And Carolyn has taken much time out of her busy schedule to talk to us about the good work that she and the Alliance have done over the years. And thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, happy to help you put a little spotlight on what you do. How does the Alliance for Safe Communities address its top concerns today? What are the things you actually do?
Well, like we said, with government department agencies, news media, working directly with members of the community, where there's a community issue of, say, a pedophile or reentry center put in their neighborhood, and they definitely feel that they're at risk and not as safe as they were.
So you're in a position to know about some of these placements before they happen, and you can get to media or local organizations?
That's rare, but there is one right now that's under my radar that I will be addressing soon, and it's in Cranston. And we have big concerns because the agreement at Harrington Hall was to have a cap of 5 sex offenders in there, and now there are 20 sex offenders in a building of a total of 80-some, homeless, indigent, parole, probation. It's run by House of Hope. You know, that's a $2 million nonprofit budget that they have, and their clients are wandering the streets of Cranston, Garden City, Sakanasa Crossroads, literally panhandling in traffic all day. I don't think that that's a good reinvestment in our justice system.
Well said. And they were tasked to have a maximum of 5 sex offenders. They've gone 4 times that.
In 2 years.
And nobody has said much of anything?
I'm going to be saying something very soon.
Well,
I've gotten a lot of community feedback with their concern. They really haven't been organizing, but I believe that I'm going to be starting with the newspapers and then move on, and we're probably going to have to look at some kind of statewide legislation that is being done in other states to cap the number of pedophiles that you have in any facility, whether it's a halfway house or this homeless shelter of 80-some men.
Doesn't this example also go to the kinds of supervision, if any, that the agreement that Harrington Hall had with Department of Corrections gets? I know there should be somebody on the state side who's supposed to monitor that they're doing what they said they would do, and that obviously hasn't happened.
There should be someone, but...
Would you consider suggesting liability for people who drop that ball?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's a big thing that may be coming up in the future. I'm just wondering if you can give us some other examples of some of this, of some of the cases that you're working on that are the things that are kind of getting you energized to stay in this fight.
Well, we have closed cases, but we have some open cases. One open case that we have right now, I actually highlighted at the murder sentencing bill. Matthew Komrowski brutally murdered Shirley Donnelly, beat her, choked her, stabbed her to death, and then set her body on fire on a mattress in Riverbend Apartments in Cranston. He had 4 years of parole that he hadn't used, so he's using them now. So we're on the 3rd year of waiting for this to go to trial, because he can waste his time with 4 years. He bounces back from medium security into the Eleanor Slater building, which is for the criminally insane, back and forth, to and fro, debating whether he's fit for trial, sane, whatever. But what I caught most recently, and I brought to Channel 12's attention, and I believe it was Tim White ran the segment, was Matthew Komrowski's in this building for the criminally insane, and he has a Facebook page. And he's got a bundle of friends, and I do mean bundle. One of them looked like about a 13, 14-year-old Asian girl. Okay, he's in there. He is an affiliated gang member of the Bloods. He committed this heinous murder, domestic violence murder. He's in there playing games, and he sets up a Facebook page for himself. He has someone take a picture of him in the visiting room through the window. Hi, I'm in here. And posts a phone number from within the Eleanor Slater building, and he quotes on his page saying, "Homie's bored, call me." And he posts a phone number, only for Tim White to find out that there were 2 accessible phones in this building for the criminally insane that these inmates could use unsupervised. So, when I passed the murder sentencing bill, I addressed the Senate Judiciary. Are we taking murder seriously in this state? I don't think so. Not when we have a murderer, I do believe the face of evil in there. I have an elderly case that's an open case as well that will draw attention to what's happening with the elderly in the high rises. Under Congress's laws, I believe it was in the 1980s, if you're disabled, you can live with the elderly now. Remember the good old days, Mark, when we knew that when our parents got old, if they had to go on living, it would just be elderly? Not anymore. Now, if you're a drug addict, you're disabled. So there's drug dealing, prostitution, everything. The elderly being shaken down for money. The elderly are even being sexually assaulted in these buildings. I will be revealing a case this year that is exactly what happened. It was caught on surveillance camera in front of the building. The individual's in the prison, and we'll be fighting his parole release in February.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's plenty going on out there to keep your blood boiling.
We try.
And I think it's to the good of all Rhode Islanders that you're out there fighting. So when I ask what's on the horizon for the Alliance, what do you see going forward? It looks like you're staying in this fight.
I have victims with their open cases that are counting on me to be there through the end. The Donnelly family, they've been brutalized by the system. This little Facebook game that Matthew Komrowski did, that's going to help in court. He wants to say that he's insane. How many insane people set up Facebook pages and figure out a way to communicate with the outside world while you're locked in a building for the criminally insane? That'll hurt him in trial. Then, like I said, the other cases that we have open. And pending legislation. We definitely will be kept busy.
Well, that's good, and it helps us all. Would you take a minute to just make sure that the folks at home know your website?
You can Google the Alliance for Safe Communities, Rhode Island. It's asc-ri.org. You'll see that you can email us directly on our website. And I hope you all enjoy it. There's a great deal of information there, a wealth of information on reentry. The page is Reentry Fast and Furious. There's a great deal of information on educating people about pedophiles and what they do, elderly and elderly abuse, and any communications media that we get involved in, stories, cases, rallies, issues portal.
Coming as I do from a political background, which is also a nonprofit enterprise, I presume you have a donations page?
Yeah, we have a PRX page. I'm not one to push give us donations.
Well, you said earlier,
it's private donations.
said earlier that you operate solely on
Yes.
donations,
Yes,
and
we
that
do.
you yourself don't take a salary.
No,
So-
I don't.
It's not very often, folks, that we find a true believer who has been this effective and this successful in doing these sorts of things for you. So if you've got a couple bucks that you were otherwise going to send to GoFundMe, the Alliance for Safe Communities is a good alternative, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
And so you've got open cases now. You're
Yeah.
going forward, and we'll see you again in the halls of the State House,
Yes.
in legislative hearings,
Yes.
and in promoting legislation to.
Yes, I'm hoping that regarding that sex offender cap on halfway houses or facilities where they're keeping them, that would be something that I might be looking at. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. Someone has to get up and do it, and I'm not counting on any liberal progressive politicians on Smith Hill.
Well, thank you very much, Carolyn Medeiros, Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Community. To quote Carolyn, it's not going away anytime soon, but luckily neither is she. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mark Zaccaria for Common Sense. Thank you for watching.
I got curious about where the happiest Americans actually live. Where do you go to find data about happy people and where they live? Wondered how happy is defined. Well, you can try the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, where amongst the many learned articles you discover that owning a pet will do it for you. Those who have dogs say their self-esteem and feelings of belonging and meaning are enhanced by a dog lick. In 2007, 2/3 of American households actually had at least one pet. Now, if you went to the Journal of Epidemiology, you would discover that men who enjoy art and other cultural activities and like physical activity and outdoor hobbies and volunteer a lot are happier. Now, the ladies are cheerier when they have church and sports in their lives. Reading the article in Clinical Psychology that talks to the art of positive thinking, I learned that if I write down the 3 positive things that happen to me each week, I will be happier. And don't forget to write as many thank you notes as you can. Science magazine suggests that the more money you give away, the happier you'll be. And volunteering for selfless reasons helps you live longer. Okay, I'm good in that department. Of course, there are a lot of other ways to get happy, and the happy literature is extensive. However, you get to happiness, there seems to be a correlation between where you live and how happy you are. How are we doing in Rhode Island? Now, I discovered an article listing us as 42nd out of 50 in 2009. A bit outdated, so I went to the folks who do a survey every year on well-being. And that would be the Gallup folks. Free stuff, so I downloaded the 2014 Well-Being Index. It's a pretty comprehensive look at all 50 states. Now, the categories of well-being these folks use are 1, likes what you do every day. 2, encouraged by someone to be healthy. 3, have enough money to do everything you want to do. 4, city or place you live is perfect place for you. And lastly, view your physical health as near perfect. Ooh. Now, the actual comparative breakdown state to state lists each state in purpose. Purpose is, that would be the area of liking what you do every day. Now, our rank in Rhode Island is 49th. Next is social, where we scored 50. Then there's community, where we indicated if we liked where we lived, felt safe and had pride in our community, we were 45th. Now, we did fairly well in the financial arena with a 27 score and the physical score of 14. Both those scores skewed the overall ranking, so we ended up 37th. So if we are not that happy here, where would we move to get happier? The Gallup folks think that would be Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton, Florida. Large community. I think a lot of us are already there, though. Then you might choose urban Honolulu, no snow, or Raleigh, North Carolina, El Paso, Texas, Austin, Texas, Provo, Utah, San Jose, California, the Washington, Arlington, Alexandria area of D.C., Winston-Salem, North Carolina. These are all in the top 10 places where well-being gets high marks. Wondered how much it costs for housing in those places. I found some statistics comparing red and blue states as to the affordability of housing. If I'm going to improve my well-being in a different state, I'll need a house I can afford. Well, seems housing costs are twice as much in the deep blue markets, think Rhode Island, Massachusetts, at $227 per square foot, versus the red markets where you spend $119 per square foot. So when you hear that the well-being index likes Florida, North Carolina, Texas, there's a reason. I guess I would not like to pay income taxes to any state I move to, so that limits things a bit too. Florida still looks good. Well, this is all swell, but my wife refuses to talk about moving since she's still in the working world and we have grandkids nearby. So I dream on, but was cheered when I read an article by Robert Roy Bryn, penned in May of 2009. And he said, happiness is a complex thing. Past studies have found that happiness is partly inherited. In other words, have great parents. And that Republicans are happier than Democrats, and that old men are happier than old women. So I have it made. I am old, male, and Republican. And look just like this. So why am I not a bit happier here in Rhode Island? Thank you for watching, and God bless.